Hello. Today we actually have a fairly short video. We're going to be talking about the proposed rule change around how HCC scores are capped for ACOs over the course of a contract. This is more of almost a house cleaning thing. They're changing some nuances in the way the rule is done. And so it's a fairly quick explanation of this. There's not necessarily a big overarching view of compared to some of the times when we've talked about ratchet effects and other things. This is really changing the mechanism for how the cap is done, and it's an advantageous thing for ACOs in this new capping rule. So let's dive in and take a look. So traditionally, ACOs have been capped for HCC growth at 3%. And this is done at each entitlement group level. So every single entitlement group was capped at a 3% growth. So each individual one, sometimes you'd have ESRD capped or disabled group capped, and the others wouldn't be. That's still going to be the case. There's still going to be caps applied at the individual group level, but what they're changing is that the determination of whether you will be capped is done at an aggregate level. And so below is the flow chart that explains exactly how this is done. And let me zoom in so this is a little more clear. Again, I'm showing this at the entitlement group level in this one just to make it really clear. But each of these boxes, it's the same exact calculation. So first, we're going to take the demographic risk scores. And so they've broken out the cap, and they've basically, you use the demographic scores to determine your aggregate cap. Again, this is going to be based on 3%, but there's some nuances here. So the way this works is we start with your demographic risk score ratio. So we look at the PY versus BY3 for each of the entitlement groups. And then we're going to dollar weight that. So we're going to multiply that by the proportion of the historical benchmark that's accounted for that entitlement group. The way we do this is we multiply the historical benchmark by the BY3 proportion of, in this case, ESRD bennies at this top. That's going to give us a dollar amount that's represented by the ESRD population. We're then going to divide that by the total historical benchmark, and that gives the proportion of the benchmark that's accounted for by this group in terms of dollars. And so we have this dollar weight, and we're going to multiply that by our demographic risk ratio, and then we're going to sum all of those up, and that's going to give us an overall dollar weighted risk ratio from PY to the BY3. And that's where we're going to figure out this 3% cap. So whatever that growth was, so you can potentially have more than a 3% cap in that they're taking the demographics out of it. So they're going to say, if your demographic score grew by 3%, we don't want to pay attention to that. So then they're actually going to add the 3% to that. So if your demographic score grew by 3%, you're going to add an additional 3. So your actual cap will be 6%. And that's going to be what your HCC growth is capped at. And they're assuming essentially that the demographic score is going to be proportional to some increase in your actual HCC score and the risk score there. So they're allowing for some of that growth due to changes in demographics. So then we come down here and we do the exact same thing for the actual HCC. So we're going to figure out your HCC growth using the exact same method. So we're going to take that risk ratio, we're going to multiply it by the dollar weighted amount for each entitlement group and sum that up. So now we have how much your HCC scoring basically grew outside of demographics. We're going to compare those. If the HCC base without the demographics grew more than that aggregate cap, more than that 3% plus whatever your demographic change was, then they're going to cap you. Now, they're going to go back and only cap those specific risk ratios that are higher than this amount. So in essence, both the individual individual entitlement group and your overall aggregate score have to be above this aggregate cap before that individual entitlement group gets capped. And I know that's a little confusing, but let's just go through ESRD. Let's say you had 12% growth in your ESRD HCC score, and you had a 3% growth in the demographic score plus that 3%. So you're allowed 6% growth overall, and you had 12% growth in your ESRD. Well, let's say all the others just grew proportionate to their demographic score, so at 3%. Well, when you figure all that out, because ESRD is such a small proportion, you're not going to exceed that cap of 6% because ESRD won't be large enough to overcome that. So nothing will get capped, even though ESRD individually is greater than the cap that we've determined. Now, let's say that it was the age non-dual that grew at 12%. Well, because age non-dual is such a large proportion of the dollars, and let's say some of the others grew enough that the overall aggregate was higher. Well, then they're going to go back and they're going to say, well, which of these individual entitlement groups is higher? And if only the age non-dual, then only the age non-dual will receive that cap. And that's the way that this update to the HCC capping is going to work. Hope that was really helpful for a nice short video for another one of the proposed 2024 rule changes.